Dallas Cowboys quarterback Trey Lance just keeps getting better and better and better. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Lane McCool. On today's show, we're breaking down the biggest news and nuggets coming out of week 2 of Dallas Cowboys OTAs. And let's start with Trey Lance because we got a lot of Trey Lance information yesterday. First and foremost, looked really good in practice, according to multiple reports, worked with the second team. He and Cooper Rush are kind of splitting reps with the second team. What was your biggest takeaway when it comes to Trey Lance?
Well, I think that the hopefully that the improvement is taking, right? Like, I think a lot of what they wanted to do with Trey Lance was kind of work on his fundamentals and work on his footwork and work on just kind of the timing and feel of things. And I think if you go and watch Trey Lance with San Francisco, the snaps that he got, he didn't look like a quarterback that was playing with a lot of rhythm, or he was kind of winging it and using his athleticism and what is a extremely live arm to kind of overcome, whatever challenges he was facing. And he wasn't necessarily like playing inside of himself,
No.
And I think that look, I mean, that's kind of not so unexpected. I look at someone like a Jordan Love, who came into the league from I think it was Nevada, right? That he played
Utah
at
State.
Utah State. That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
And just was very, very raw, had a lot of athleticism to him, had a kind of arm that you felt like you could develop. But his junior year was a lot better than his senior year. And there were some questions about whether he could kind of put it all together. And I think that's kind of, in a lot of sense where Trey Lance is that he just needed a lot longer than some of these other prospects that, you consider to be first round picks, right? That he just needed snaps. He needed opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
He's always been a younger player. He's always been a player that hasn't had a ton of experience. Obviously he went to what is considered a smaller school, but obviously a school that is well renowned for having a pro type system and developing quarterbacks who play in the NFL. So I think, getting the opportunity to get with a coach like McCarthy, who has obviously a lot of experience with kind of developing quarterbacks, and then just kind of taking some of the pressure off, right? Like, and just allowing him to kind of grow within himself, to not be developing underneath the microscope of, hey, when is our starting quarterback going to be good enough, right? It's like there's already someone there filling that role. His job is just to kind of continually get better, continue to work and refine his mechanics, and with the hope that eventually you're able to play at that level. And so I think that it sounds like that Trey Lance has really taken to this role and has improved. And I think you hear about the kind of person that Trey Lance is, right? And the kind of work ethic he has, very similar to Dak, it sounds like. And when you hear that and you hear about the opportunity he's got and all the kind of, elements that he has to his game naturally, there's a good hope that he could develop and that he could, kind of take a step or two now that he's sort of kind of settled into his mechanics and his role on this team.
The best way to consume OTA news and minicamp news is the drumbeat, right? Like, are we hearing the same thing over and over again? I remember when, just a couple of years ago, Deron Bland, it was, hey, this Fresno State kid keeps looking good. Next day, hey, he made another play. And it just seemed like week after week, we're getting this steady stream of good news about Deron Bland. And then you see what he turned into, right? It's kind of been that way for Trey Lance this offseason. You had Mike McCarthy yesterday at the press conference just glowing about Trey Lance and how far he's come over the last year. You had Dak Prescott last night talking about how he's pushing me. He's getting a lot better. I mean, listen, let's just be clear, because I know there's going to be people that take this out of context.
That's right.
Dak doesn't need to worry about his starting job. But what he's saying is Trey Lance has gotten really good. That makes me want to make sure that I'm continuing to improve my game. And then you had Trey Lance yesterday talk about his confidence. Like, he's never felt more confident. He feels confident in his mechanics. He feels confident in the offense. So we'll see as we get to training camp and we get to preseason just how much he's improved. But I don't think there's any doubt in the building that this is a much better quarterback now than when they got him back in August.
And listen, I'm certainly not predicting this, but don't rule out the fact that Dak doesn't have to look over his shoulder. I'm sure that all of us would laugh heartily at Tony Romo having to look over his shoulder at some Mississippi State quarterback that got drafted in the 4th round, So, weirder things have happened. So, yeah, obviously it's OTAs. There's smoke being blown up. Everyone's, behinds all the time, like with this kind of thing. So, obviously don't take it as gospel, but outside the spectrum of possibility, the fact that a guy that was, at one point taken in the top 5 overall just based on talent alone could develop into a starting level quarterback at some point is not outside the realm of possibility in my mind.
It's not. We should also mention, so the Cowboys had to go inside the start of the practice on Wednesday. According to Michael Galkin, like, he was just lights out once they moved inside the star. He had multiple throws over the middle of the field that were impressive. Again, this is what you want to see from the Trey Lance development. Like, if things were going to work out, you would be hearing these kind of rumblings coming out of OTAs. The Cowboys have mini camp, 2 weeks? And then training camp, obviously late July, early August. We'll see if this continues, but so far, so good for Trey Lance.
Listen for the drumbeat, right? Listen for more of this. Again, it's not that we're getting a positive review that we're excited, and that's not necessarily what it is. But it's, hey, this is the first beat. Is there going to be more of them as we move on? If there is, then I think that's going to be a good sign for his overall development.
Last thing on Trey Lance before we move on, Mike McCarthy pretty much confirmed that we're going to say a lot of Trey Lance in the preseason. He said that he and Trey have been talking a lot about the preseason, what that's going to look like, and how important that is for him. I mean, I have my doubts that we'll see Dak play at all. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if Cooper Rush is only coming in to finish out 4th quarters. And this is going to be the Trey Lance show in preseason. And these, however many quarters he gets, let's say 7 quarters, are going to define a lot for him, not only this year, but what his NFL future might look like.
Oh yeah, this preseason will be as big for him as any preseason for anybody around the league. I mean, I think, I honestly, when you started that sentence, I thought, I'd be surprised if we saw Cooper Rush take a couple more than a handful of snaps in the preseason. There's only a few of these games now. They only have a couple of these now, so it's like you have only a limited amount of these preseason games to kind of get a good view of this. And it seems like the Cowboys have kind of moved away from these shared practice situations that kind of provide you similar sort of, game reps, I guess, in practice. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they just decided to completely hand over, 95% of the preseason snaps to Trey Lance, just simply because he needs the repetition. Look, Cooper Rush doesn't need it. I mean, they need it to kind of maintain, but they don't need it to develop. I mean, they are where they are. Trey Lance is more than anybody, especially in that quarterback room, needs those snaps. So I wouldn't be shocked if he got force-fed a healthy dose of them this preseason.
All right, we also got some news about some Cowboy injuries, some good, some bad. We'll dive into that next. This episode is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, and that's Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're just looking for some extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and the data you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination. That is yahoofinance.com, yahoofinance.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. All right, Landon, let's talk about Luke Schoonmaker, who has another new injury. This time it's a hamstring injury that could potentially keep him out through the entire OTAs. How big of a setback is this for him?
Well, I mean, honestly, it's not that much of a setback because he's already dealing with having to be recovering from shoulder surgery. So he was probably going to be pretty limited in these OTAs anyways. I mean, it's not good. Like there's no way to spin it as positive, but the fact is that it's happening while he's already kind of having to deal with the shoulder recovery means that it may not have a. I think it's worse for what it means overall, right? Than the actual time he's missing. I don't know that.
Here's the other thing: like out when you see the tweet out for the rest of OTAs, it's like, oh man. But then you realize like OTAs are next week, and there's like
2 weeks.
practices.
Yeah, it's like
so it's like this week and next week.
Yeah, and honestly, how much would he have been participating, even if he didn't have the hamstring issue, right? He probably would have been limited with the shoulder recovery stuff. So, it's in reality, it's not that big of a deal, but in the sense of this guy cannot stay healthy, it's a big deal. So I think it's a slight in the sense that like, good Lord, is this going to keep happening with this guy? But in the long term, is this specific injury going to affect anything with training camp or anything? Probably not. It probably won't.
Well, we have 2 months until training camp.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. It's just that when you go back to his days at Michigan and then you go to the Shrine games and he couldn't practice because of the Shrine practices. And then you remember the foot injury that he had last year during training camp that limited him then. And then he had to have surgery after the season because of a shoulder. And now it's starting to add up. And you're wondering like, okay, is this tight end is a position that you just need to be available. Like that's honestly, I remember Bill Parcells making Jason Witten practice through every kind of injury because he kind of had to toughen him up. I'm not saying the Cowboys need to do that for Schoonmaker, but it's one of those positions like you got to be able to play through some injuries.
You get to see McCarthy out there in the practice field calling Schoonmaker a receiving tight end the whole time, like Bill did to Jason.
Yeah.
Look, it's not great, obviously, but I think it does also. It's not changing any timelines as it is right now. I still believe in Schoonmaker and his talent. I mean, I think that he can still be a really good fit for this team, but he really does need to kind of figure some of the situation out. And honestly, like this could also be a situation where it's a minor hamstring thing and they already, were going to be cautious with him with the shoulder stuff. So they just decided, you know what, we can't afford to have you missing any training camp time. Let's nip this in the bud while we're dealing with the recovery stuff. I will say this, the hamstring stuff is always, it makes my eye twitch, right? It's just like, it's like a trigger. The soft tissue thing has not been as much of a problem on this team as it had been the previous decade, right? It feels like
we're knocking.
It feels like the training staff has done a good job of kind of nipping that in the bud, or at least knowing how to handle those situations. And I think a lot of it has helped with the kind of tracking and the GPS stuff has kind of helped them regulate that a lot better. So I'm hoping that they can kind of clean this up over the next 5 weeks, get him ready for training camp, and hopefully we have a clean situation there in training camp.
All right, some other injury news coming out of Cowboys OTAs. Osa Odigizua did not practice on Wednesday due to a hip injury. Michael Galkin said that there's no concern for him for training camp. Seems relatively minor. Mozzie Smith not working because of his shoulder surgery. DeMarvio Overshown coming back from the ACL. John Stevens ACL. David Durden ACL. So nothing super shocking outside of the Osa news. We did get some good news that Trayvon Diggs and John Stevens Jr. look like they're progressing really well. And the expectation is that they should be ready to go pretty quickly into training camp.
Yeah. And, I think just to go back real quick, the Mozzie situation, Mozzie had his shoulder situation around the same time Schoon did, right? And he's also not practicing, just to kind of show you how they would have handled it if Schooney didn't have the hamstring, right? So, yeah, and then obviously, like you said, the three ACL guys, the three ACL rookies, and then and then obviously Trayvon Diggs. It sounds like all those guys are kind of ahead of schedule. If you remember, the three ACLs happened like all within the three rookie ACLs all happened within a week of each other. They had the two in the Seattle game, and then one I think like 4 or 5 days after that. So Stevens Jr., Durden, and Demo are all kind of on very similar timelines. 9 to 12 months is typical for that injuries. So September would be 12 months. We're kind of in the 9-month range. So there is a very good chance that they will get to training camp and maybe, usually how they handle that is they kind of ease them in that first week a little bit, and then they clear them and then they get in. So I would imagine they get almost a full training camp load if all things kind of continue down this pace.
And remember, typically that first week of training camp is pretty light anyways.
Right.
They're not doing a lot of contact or full pads. So I would expect also once we get to these, training camp, I wouldn't be surprised if you see Diggs like practice one day, be off the next day.
Oh, sure.
That rotation as they try to ease them back into the practice field. But for the most part, pretty encouraging injury updates. We should mention no Micah Parsons. These are voluntary OTAs. It doesn't cost them anything to miss them. No CeeDee Lamb. We did see Brandon Cooks was out there as the number one receiver. And that was another note that I had as Brandon Cooks and Kevontae Turpin, along with Jalen Tolbert, worked with the first team offense. Seems like Turpin had a really good day at practice, as did Brandon Cooks. We talked about Turpin a couple days ago.
Mm-hmm.
He could be an X factor in this offense. If Turpin can give them a little bit more as a receiver than he did last year, maybe that's what they need to take this offense to the next level.
Yeah, and this is kind of what we had discussed, not only just when we were talking about third receiver options, but just, a while ago when we were talking about the idea of a third receiver by committee, right? Just like using the kind of tool, the players that you have, combining the gadget folks with the kind of regular guys who can play everywhere like Tolbert, and I think that's kind of what we had in mind, right? As Turpin specifically as a guy that, look, he's going to be on your roster. He's deadly with the ball in his hands. Whether you want to deploy him as a slot receiver running a slot fade, like I think he was, it sounds like he was yesterday, or having him run a reverse, or having him as your outlet receiver as you send everyone else deep, and suddenly he's got the ball in space and he can create that way. And frankly, I mean, we saw him, I think, if I'm not mistaken, just take some carries out of the backfield several points last year. So obviously, as the season went on, they were trying to do more and more to get Turpin the football. And it appears that they feel like he has, kind of continued to advance a little bit. I will say this, that he, in training camp last year, he looked a lot more like a receiver than he ever had previously. And then even more so than what he ended up doing in the regular season. I think he had like a key drop at some point in the season, if I can't remember exactly what game, but I think after that they kind of were a little bit hesitant. But I'm glad to see them kind of lean back into them, because I really do think that, when deployed properly, I'm not trying to make him my every down third receiver necessarily this year, but I think he could be part of a rotation and certainly be a guy that gets four targets a game or something like that. Just
I'd say like the way I'd say is like 5 looks, right? Maybe that's
5 touches,
5 looks, 3 targets and 2 carries, or 4 targets and 1 carry. Like I think around 5 looks a game on offense feels about right for Cavante.
On top of all the special team stuff he's going to do for you, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. And again, I think having guys like that, it just adds an extra angle to your offense. It's something else the teams have to prepare for.
Yes.
It helps change things up a little bit, and so your offense doesn't get stale.
All right, let's talk about which players are in the best shape of their lives. An annual tradition here across the NFL. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater events near you. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose your seats. I can't wait for the NFL season. I can't wait to go to multiple games this year. And you guys know that I'm going to be using Gametime to purchase all of my tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day, we're going to continue our burning questions series on Friday, so make sure you guys tune in for that. But Landon, let's wrap up with best shape of our live season. We got a tweet about DeMarvion Overshown, Cowboys second-year linebacker, adding like 13 to 15 pounds of muscle. We saw
lean muscle. Lean muscle.
Lean muscle, not just muscle, but lean muscle.
Lean muscle. Mm-hmm.
Jalen Tolbert looks like he added some muscle, especially in his lower body. Before we talk about the players individually, how much do you care or buy this nonsense?
First of all, it's the Masters, right? It's a tradition like no other, right? It happens every year. Every year we all fall for the banana in the tailpipe on it. Yep. Like, I think it matters in the sense that when I go to training camp every year, one of the first things I do in the first few days, you talk about how things are a little bit slow the first week, right? One of the first things that I start to do, like in the first few days of practice, is just kind of take in what the players physically look like, right? Just because it helps you to follow them on the field later when it's hard to get numbers at times. But B, it just kind of gives you an idea of how they're playing, biomechanically, right? So I think it matters in the sense that, if they're bigger, they're physically bigger, and that, affects how they're playing in ways that you find out throughout training camp. But I don't know that it matters up until you see how that weight affects them, right? Like if they're physically stronger, then I want to see them playing strong. And if they play stronger, then I'm going to get excited because they put on weight and they're using that weight. Congratulations. If they lost weight to get faster, I want to see them be faster. And then we can talk about, hey, this guy lost 15 pounds. He looks slim. He's moving great. Up until then, reporters just making observations on men's bodies is not necessarily as much super useful to me. But I think it is something, like, as I said, as an evaluator, as someone who's watching these guys to kind of see improvements or changes they've made in the offseason, it's something to note, but then it doesn't really mean anything unless it translates to production on the field in some sort. Whether, like I said, bigger, are you stronger? If you lost weight to get quicker, are you actually quicker? That's where it actually matters. But up until then, it's more just something to note as opposed to something to be super excited about, I guess. Having said that, I will still retweet all of these, and eyeball emoji the guys that I
into it every time.
I'm still a fan, so but I consciously can't separate what my logical brain knows and the oh my god Cowboys side of my brain.
I get it. So I just. After years and years of doing this, I just try not to overreact too much. Now, I will say the one position where I do care about it is like when a running back who's getting older sheds weight to keep the quickness. That's when I care.
You have a history in caring about that very specific.
I do.
Yes, I would.
I also generally, I will say generally, I care when players are dropping weight to get quicker as they get older.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a very, very good defensive end on this team right now that shed a bunch of weight, like in the middle part of his career to maintain his quickness. And honestly, it might have saved his career, right?
I think that there is value. I mean, look, weight changes are important and they are something to note. And because of exactly what we just talked about, like what's the intent here? Like what are you trying to do? And I think, we had a whole conversation when DeMarcus Lawrence went through that and how we really like it when these kind of bigger defensive ends tend to start losing weight as they start getting older to kind of slim down just to kind of extend their career. And lo and behold, it's done wonders for DeMarcus Lawrence.
Absolutely.
Right. So, I would say, again, all of it is noteworthy. I mean, do you have to quote tweet it with eyeball emojis because you're excited? No, probably not. But it's still something that is worth noting and to keep in the back of your mind, because if you see the results of those changes, if you see an actual change in the way that the player is moving based on that weight, then it's relevant information.
Having said all of that, I am kind of excited about Jalen Tolbert adding some more weight. Like if he's going to be an every down receiver, like in a starter and potentially an outside receiver with CeeDee Lamb playing in the slot, I just don't know if you're going to be able to do that at 190, 195 pounds. If you can get up to 200, 205, and you can be a little bit bigger so you can handle blocking a little bit more, I do think that makes sense. I don't know if I saw him look significantly bigger in OTAs yesterday, but apparently the people that were there said he did. So
I just remember a guy that had very thin calves and thin lower body, and it does look like he's filled out a little bit. So maybe that helps with kind of running through arm tackles or contested catch stuff, maybe getting up and catching the ball. Again, it doesn't really matter or mean anything until you see it translate on the field. And then once it translates on the field, then we can kind of hypothesize on why it's happening better. Is it because he's bigger and stronger? Is it because he gained more skill? Those are fun debates for August and September.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.